Hi, and welcome to the Metamorphosis podcast. I am your host, Mike Elliott, and this is the place where we get to explore what it actually means and requires to become an empowered man, an embodied man in today's world. And one of my favorite ways of bringing this to you is to actually invite guests who I feel inspired by, who who are actually living it, who are walking the path, who are, living what they preach and what they talk. And today I'm really excited to have a really special guest on the show. His name is GS Youngblood. He is the author of The Masculine in Relationship and The Art of Embodiment for Men. And first of all, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for being here, GS.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike.
And what I want to say here is, the reason I wanted to pull on GS for all of you listening is I have followed David Deida's work for years, have been practicing and bringing it into my life. And there's a man that I follow on social media who posted, like, these are the must-read books for any man. And one of them that was on that list that I hadn't read was the Masculine in Relationship that GS wrote. And when I read it, there was a resonance that GS delivers that just landed deeper in the cells of my being. There's just so much more that made sense inside of my body. It made it easier for me to integrate some of the pieces that I was kind of struggling with in my relationship. And I was so moved by how much had shifted in my life once I read GS's book that I was like, I need to have this man on the show. We need to have some conversation, and for all of you listening to really get to experience this man for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Mike. It's a common experience that I've experienced with men where they didn't realize these dynamics of masculine, feminine polarity were out there, and so it just takes somebody to shine the light on them, but the inherent truth of them really resonates for a lot of guys, and there's an often an aha moment that things can actually be different, and that's the most empowering part of this. Is like, yeah, guys, you don't have to stay in this sort of the dysfunction of a relationship. That things can be better once you start to learn these dynamics.
Yeah. And I want to dive so deep here and in the honoring of time, but I'd love is if you could touch just briefly for our listeners of what led you to being on that path, what led you to not just writing the book of the masculine relationship, but actually starting to live those principles. Your story is a bit like is in the book for any of those who read it, but just for our listeners here, if you could share a little bit of your journey there.
Yeah, like a lot of situations in life, failure is a great teacher, and I was no exception to that. And my impetus for getting on this path was the implosion of my marriage. It ended in a particularly painful way, and it forced me to come to the realization that there had to be a better way. At the end of that marriage, I had allowed myself to become pretty emasculated, so I'm kind of just running around trying to please her and keep her from being upset. And of course, what I found out later was that was actually part of the problem, and that was making it worse and driving her farther away rather than bringing her in. And I was in that classic nice guy situation where I had needs, but I wasn't speaking them, and then I was getting secretly resentful. And as your resentment leaks out, it starts to poison the relationship, and then things start to really go south. And that was exactly the archetype that I had become. And so the pain of that fueled me. Pain was my motivation. Failure was my fuel in this quest to get on a different path. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of things happen. One is I got introduced to people and teachers that really had deep insights into this realm. And like me, I mean, like you, David Deida was the first entree I had to this masculine feminine polarity, and Way of the Superior Man is how most guys found men's work. And it was like that aha moment like you had, like, wow, I had no idea.
Mm.
And then studying with lots of other teachers, some in David's tree, a lot of teachers that aren't even in that realm at all, and trying to bring other types of philosophies into this realm. So I had this long teaching learning track where for a good 10 years I was just a student of this whole thing. And in parallel to that, I was in actually got into a relationship with a very powerful woman. I'm still with her. um, and she's got a very powerful side to her, very strong masculine from her father, but a super strong feminine from her mother. And so
Mhm.
I was able to take these things I was learning but bring them into real long-term relationship, and really get a sense of when you're with a powerful woman who's also sensitive and sees and feels and senses things, what creates more connection, what creates more relational success, and ease, which is what a lot of guys want. We all want ease in our relationship. What created all of that, or what shut all that down? And so I was living day to day what I was learning, and trying to see what actually works and what was just sort of fluffy philosophy. So that's the path I was on, and that all started about 16 years ago, I think, when the marriage went downhill, and that brought me to today, where I'm in a situation where we've got the two books out, and really enjoying bringing these principles into the world.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you are. Thanks for sharing your journey there, because it's fascinating. One of like you teach what's called the masculine blueprint, which I want you to expand on a little bit
Yeah.
here. But the thing I wanted to name is one of the principles is, responding versus reacting.
Hmm.
And the potency of these principles is incredible. And the piece I wanted to share here is this is what really like, whoa, it hit me deep is my partner and I were in a situation and our kitten had gotten out of the house and she was freaking out. I was away on like a work retreat and there was a lot of upset. And in short, I was like, okay, there is a heated feminine, super like I can really relate. My partner is very empowered and she was really heated. And I was driving home and I was listening to your book on the way home, and it was so potent that even just that principle and what you spoke to and the examples that you used, when I got home, I just like deeply attuned to what was happening in my body while relating with her level of upset. And there
Hmm.
was like shaming and criticism and all the things flying at me. And I remember just like feeling what it was you were presenting in that book, like inside of me, like almost like you were sitting there on the couch with me and just like, breathe, brother, just breathe. Like, don't defend, don't just like be here. And if there's a place where she's like going at you, just bring in a boundary, slow it down, be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, yeah. And there was a moment like that really changed for both of us in that. And that was where I could feel myself just and watch everything getting activated in me. And then instead of like bringing my piece to it and reacting, it was just reflecting back like, yeah, I totally understand why you're so upset.
Hmm.
That makes so much sense. I'm so sorry
Hmm.
for that hurt. And it's like, and then another piece would come in and I just kept doing that. And by the end of it, she just melted and then started crying.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh my God, thank you, GS Youngblood. Because it was this moment that actually dropped us into a deeper intimacy. I felt more empowered as a man of like, oh, I think I really get it now.
Yeah.
Like, and one of the principles and I want you to speak on this, but the last thing I wanted to share here is I could really feel your principle of feelings first, facts later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a
yeah,
big
if
one.
you,
That's a big
if you,
one. Yeah. And even before I get into respond versus react,
yeah,
what you're describing is you're starting to shape events in the interrelating between you and your woman, rather than like, okay, she's just upset and then I'm over here and I have to endure, but she's created the reality. You actually stepped in and started to you're co-creating with her what the reality in the moment is, and actually affecting this, rather than just being hunkered down and getting battered by your woman, which is like how a lot of guys feel of course we shut down. Of course we get defensive because we feel very powerless, and that's all we can manage to do. So
Hmm.
I love what you're talking about is really a state of more empowerment. Like I'm
Hmm.
part of this conversation too, and I can actually affect how things go. And it's one of the things I talk about, that the feminine is mostly responsive. They're responsive to our way of being. So the best way to get your
Hmm.
woman to be a certain way is not about demanding that she change or stop or anything like that, unless it's a boundary. But it's your way of being can actually evoke a different way of being in her. And I think a lot of guys don't really understand that their way of being is much more responsive to our way of being. So you have the power. And one of the quotes from the book is, you may or may not be the problem. You may or may not be the problem, but you are the solution. What
Hmm.
that means is, like, stop trying to figure out who's wrong or right, and going to blame and why she's being such a crazy bitch and all of these things. It's like, stop that. Actually, what can you bring? What can you do to be the solution, to lead the two of you out of whatever dysfunction that you're in now? So it's a real message of empowerment that I'm constantly repeating over and over, so guys can really see that they have the power to create something different. And part of that, one of those ways, is what you said, which was being very grounded,
Hmm.
and using the principles of respond versus react. And would you like us to go into the first part of the blueprint now, respond versus react?
A part of me does, and just to follow kind of the momentum of what you're sharing here, is because I hear a lot of men, if you're okay with it, let's just go with that. This piece here that's alive is there's a lot of men that I um speak to where it's a really new concept to even understand that their woman isn't crazy. So can
Mhm.
you expand a little bit on that? Because there's a lot of men from the conversation I've had where it's like, oh my God, she's out of control. She's crazy. Like, can
Mhm.
you just elaborate for a
Yeah.
man who maybe's in that mindset a little bit
Yeah.
deeper of what's actually happening there, and then their role there?
Yeah. Yeah. This is I have a whole module in my online course around redefining crazy. Uh,
Uh,
here's the thing for the men out there. Here's the thing. Your woman feels things, 5 to 10 times more intensely than you do. Feels emotions. That's just how the feminine is, and that's how the masculine is. They just feel things much more deeply and explosively than we do.
mhm,
And sometimes it gets to be too much.
mhm,
And they're literally in overload. And if anybody, I'm not going to, my intent is not to compare women to a child, but here's my analogy: is when your 4-year-old is overstimulated and hasn't had the nap, and their nervous system just melts down, and then they melt down, and they're inconsolable, and it's just too much for them, for their young physiology. Well, it's a similar principle with the feminine. Is sometimes the emotions get too much to handle, and they actually need you to help them carry these emotions. It's like if they tried to grab a 60-pound bag of gravel for whatever reason, it's probably too heavy for her. And she's going to need you to help her carry that bag. Well, the same thing applies in the emotional space. Um, it gets to be too much. And then either one of two things happens. Either you're a guy that can hold space for her and meet her in the emotion and create some emotional resonance where she feels accompanied in her distress. When you do that and learn those skills, then her nervous system comes down, and then you can
mhm,
have more normal, rational conversation and kind of work things out like rational people. But the problem is we don't do that. We
mhm,
get defensive. So no, no, you're wrong to feel that way because you've got incorrect information. We explain. Oh, you got to understand. Once you understand why I did that, you won't be mad.
mhm,
Um, you get stonewalling, like, just you don't even talk to me until you calm down. Like, you're just a loon. Or we try to talk them out of it. We try to dissuade them in some way. And all those are just forms of us saying, stop feeling the way you feel. The way you actually feel, you need to stop that. That's not right, and you're wrong, and you need to stop that. That's super jarring. Um, so in any of those cases, we're not creating emotional resonance. We're not accompanying them in their distress. We're not helping them co-regulate in any way. We're not being their rock in any way. And
mhm.
so now they're going to get more and more distressed because you're not actually helping them. And what they're going to do is they're going to enroll you in their drama, whether you like it or not. So if you're stonewalling her, she's going to make you hurt until, so this as a form of, so you can now feel like what it's like to feel my hurt as the woman.
Uh-huh.
And that's where, they start reading you the riot act and they bring in things out. And like you experienced in your story there, like she probably brought something out from 5 years ago in that and threw
Oof,
that too.
all of it.
Yeah. And that, so guys, that's the crazy, what you call crazy, which it's
Yeah.
your label is that it's crazy. That's her saying, I need you to help me. It doesn't sound like it. It sure as hell doesn't sound like it. But
Yeah.
that's her saying, I need you to help me. And since you're refusing to, I'm gonna escalate until you feel the pain that I'm feeling. Because
Mhm.
you had your chance to do it through empathy, but now I'm gonna make you hurt. Um, and that's where crazy comes when they're just on overload. Well, you wouldn't tell your 4-year-old daughter who's melting down to shut the heck up and stop crying. I mean, let's hope that's not your parenting style. Um, so why would you do that to your partner? That's the question.
Mhm.
So when she's crazy, just know it's like somebody who's melting down because their nervous system's just on overload. Um, you can do one of two things. You could be like, she's crazy, and I'm going to distance myself, or you can say, my woman's hurting. I'm her rock. I don't care whose fault this was, but I am going to step in and be the solution to this one way or the other, and I'm going to lead us out of this relational dysfunction by displaying some emotional leadership.
Mhm.
So that's part of what I talk to guys about redefining crazy. You got to see something different. See her as hurting rather than a raging beast.
Mhm. And then if you could expand on a little bit of that dynamic of what's actually being contributed by the masculine in that situation, that's like where it's like where there can be, Gay Hendricks talks about this and in their work is the radical self-responsibility. Like, be in relationship for there to be health. It's like two people taking 100% responsibility for what's happening. So I'd love to
Mhm.
hear from you if the feminine, and it's not to say that this is all the time, you speak about it in the book, but often when the feminine's gone into her quote unquote crazy, when she's, flooded with all of these emotions, what is the possible situation that the masculine is contributing that's leading to that they can start to look at, bring awareness on and own?
Yeah, it's usually whatever form of we were not being relational. So what you asked was how is the masculine contributing to these kind of meltdowns and situations that get really intense? And it's more often than not some form of us not being relational. And so I think one that I commonly got in trouble for and might still occasionally is I'll get super busy, whether I'm traveling or I'm just working, and I get pretty focused. And like if I'm not responsive enough to when my woman's reaching out on text or anything like that, not like she needs instant responses. But if it goes 8 hours and I haven't responded to her text from the morning, then she starts to worry that maybe something's happened to me. And that's a little teensy mild form of me being not relational. Like she's reaching out and then there's silence from this side. And that really
Mm-hmm.
almost is the definition of not relational.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting, many years ago, early in our relationship, but where I'd say, well, I was just busy. Like, why do you not understand that? Or I'd, come up with some narrative why it was okay that I hadn't responded back to her. And that's just, again, this is a little one. But the little ones, when you start to get defensive, the little ones can balloon into big fights. And um, that's one way that men can contribute to their woman getting more and more amped up. There's this little seed of maybe just a little break in the connection. Maybe she says, oh, that didn't feel very good. She says, ouch. And then the guy gets defensive or tries to tell her she shouldn't feel that way. And that's when a fight that starts this big can actually go 0 to 60 real fast, is when you start to deny her feelings and tell her that she's not supposed to feel that way for whatever reason. So that's a very common dynamic. Whatever the example is, that's a very common dynamic. So what could I have done? I could have done exactly the point you got to on the couch with your woman. It's like, oh baby, of course that wouldn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Like you reach out in the morning and then 8 hours later I haven't responded to you. Like, oh baby, that of course that wouldn't feel good. That is my bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you're taking the blame in some kind of cowering way. You're actually feeling into her pain and realizing, yeah, you played a part in that. Now, you may have been busy. That's a true statement, but you still played a part in the little disconnect. And you just own it. You're like, yeah, you're right. Totally. I should have reached out to you. That's one of the best ways that guys can handle things is she's going to throw the kitchen sink at you when she's really upset, but somewhere in there's a kernel of truth.
Mhm.
Find that kernel of truth and own it, and it's gonna de-escalate real quick. You don't have to own all the other nonsense that she throws at you, the
Yeah.
kitchen sink and the thing from 5 years ago, and all that. Like that's just noise in the system, and you got to learn to see past that to the kernel of truth. And then once you own that, that's a powerful man right there. You know what, baby, you're right. You're right, and thank you for pointing that out. That's a
Mhm.
powerful way for a man to own a situation and de-escalate it before it blows up into an absolutely needless fight. I mean, how many of us have had those fights and you're like, "Oh my God, how did we get here?" Like 30 seconds ago, we were arm in arm in a loving space, and suddenly this went 0 to 60. Well, this is one of the ways that you can bypass that kind of outcome.
Yeah, and I'm curious on your thoughts on that piece when it comes to those places. I call them the sticky places where the feminine, all of a sudden starts sharing a whole bunch. What I'm curious about, like where the hurt and bringing these past events, something that I've oriented to is not really taking the words literal, but getting curious of what she's feeling. Because I've noticed if I actually were to take in the words that are being said, like I'll just like crumble as a man and be like, I have no self-worth left.
Yeah.
There's nothing for me to stand on. I am just a
Yeah.
useless piece of meat here. And my sense is that's a common experience for a lot of men. So I'd love to hear your perspective when it comes to the words that are being shared when the woman's feeling all of those internal emotions kind of
Yeah.
flooding in.
Well, you hit it on the head. It's like, don't take the content so literally, guys. Because
Mm,
like you, Mike, you're like, she knows how to skewer you with her tongue, with her words, with her cutting remarks. Like she knows what your
mm,
hot buttons are. So don't get so worked up in it, because I think that's the men who are the more the weaker man, who he's chasing every little word and reacting to every little
mm,
thing, versus the man that masters the art of rising above the content a little bit, where you don't have to take everything literally. You certainly don't take everything personally, and know, like the bullfighter, I think this is the right analogy, know how to very gracefully
mm.
step to the side and let that fireball go on past, um, without reacting to it. Now, there's an art here, because you can do one of two things. You can become the guy that becomes very numb, and a lot of guys just go numb and dumb, and they just like they're listening, but it's like lights on, but nobody's home.
Uh,
And you don't want to go to that extreme where you're not just blocking her out. You're hearing, you're engaging, you're there, um, but you're not taking it on. So you want to make sure you don't go to numb and dumb. You also don't want to make sure that you don't go into just putting up with her shit and putting up with
mhm,
insults and things that are genuinely truly out of bounds. And that's where boundaries come in. You've already mentioned that. Um, and boundaries don't have to be like all intense and you get all jacked up. Don't talk to me like that.
yeah.
You know, a boundary could just be like, it could be playful. It could be like, whoa, 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 baby. Okay.
Mm,
Remember, we agreed we're not going to insult each other. And I'm like, I'm open to what you have to say, but I'm not going to sit here and listen to the insults. Just, baby, tell me how you feel. Show me your heart. So you could
mm,
set that boundary even with a lot of heart, um, which is, by the way, a great way to set a boundary with the feminine. Now, there's sometimes when you need to come in with, really give a hard push. Those are generally pretty rare. You can set boundaries with heart. She loves that. I think
mm,
that's the thing that guys don't realize. They love it when you stand up for yourself. They love it when you set a loving but rational boundary. But you remain open. And I think those are some of the principles around setting boundaries. Is you could set it with some heart. Don't let it all be super intense, um, and give her frame. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, is giving her frame. So Anyway, now I've talked so long, I forgot what the actual original question was. Those are some of my thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Just like, yeah, I love that piece of that, just where the feminine starts to, speak a lot, and there's lots of words and things are being pulled in from the past and what's actually going on there, which is, what I love that you labeled there is, you know, don't take it personally
Yeah.
and like really go into what she's feeling. And I love what you just shared there about the heart piece, especially when it comes to the boundaries. Because in my evolution, I've done the hard boundary, like this is your shit, back up, like not the best way,
Yeah.
but it's part of the evolution. And then
Yeah.
it evolved into like, whoa, pause, like this isn't helpful, like I just need some space, and then I'm happy to come back. I'm losing my center. Like that's been part of my evolution. And what I love when you named it in the book, I was like, "Oh, that's masterful." Is I forget, this isn't verbatim, but you kind of touched it, that there is like when there's a little bit of like dumping, or it's like, almost this experience of like, okay, now I'm feeling like a little bit of a doormat here.
Hmm.
I love how you described it in the book. It was something along the lines of like, whoa, 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 baby, like this isn't what I'm here for. I'm not okay. I'm not into this, but what I am into is like for us to connect. I'm here to really be in connection with you. And
Yeah.
there was something about that way of expressing it. I noticed for me is I've tried it a few times. One time because I wasn't really embodying the confidence in it, is like it didn't work. But there's another time where I was like, no, 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 I really believe in this and holding
Yeah.
that energy. And it is like it totally, I love your analogy there of like, in the ring with the bull, and just like guiding that energy, like not engaging with the part that's not helpful and bring
Yeah.
it into something that is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and all this sounds great as you and I talk about it, but it's hard. Let's just acknowledge our nervous
Yeah.
system is going to flare, and as you said, we're going to lose center and not be confident about it. Um, a lot of this really needs to have a foundation, and that foundation is a daily embodiment practice. And you, Mike, you know me. If you've listened to me, I'm always talking about embodiment.
Yeah.
So you've got to have a really grounded nervous system to do the kind of things you and I are talking about right now, and that is something that I'm always teaching my clients is have a daily embodiment practice. Really use that to ground your nervous system, so that when you go into these conversations with your woman or whoever, everything's just going to be a little bit easier because your nervous system won't flare quite as much. It won't be no flare. But instead of this, it's going to do this. And in that space that you've created, now you can actually start to live out of choice and intention rather than reactivity and habituation and self-defense. That's the problem, is a lot of guys live their life moment to moment out of those things. It's just scripted. The world comes with this stimuli, they get scared, and this is how they react. When you settle your nervous system, you have more spaciousness. When you have more spaciousness, you
Mm.
have more choice about how you want to be. And you can witness yourself with that spaciousness. You can actually witness yourself and how you're being in the moment, and self-correct when you start to maybe get off target of how you want to be. So a daily embodiment practice is absolutely essential. And this is why I wrote my whole second book, literally The Art of Embodiment, was because this is such an important topic. So I felt like the world needed the book, and also the video course that I put together to go along with that.
Yeah, it's such an important piece. And maybe for like, all of you listening, like if this is a new context of embodiment practices, I highly encourage getting the book. Because, like you described, it's quite in depth. There's many practices, there's many ways of really implementing it. And like you say in your second book, is what we're talking about is really great to understand and have concept of in the mind, but in order to actually show up in it, like the embodiment practices are needed. And so maybe for those listening, is there like an example of one embodiment practice that a man could implement that's like maybe simple, easy to start working with? Um, before picking up your book and diving in deeper?
Yeah. I mean, let me speak for a moment on the principles of embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
Embodiment is it's about taking some of your awareness and taking it away from the thinking mind, that self-defending, strategizing mind that we all have, and then turning it onto physical sensation in the body. Now, why would you do that? Again, most men live a lot of their lives sort of in this reality created by their thinking mind. We're also overly analytic and we stare at our phones all day. And so, of course, our mind is constantly processing and analyzing and gets very strong. And but when you're in your head, you're far less relational, and maybe we could go into that in a second here. But I'll just state it as a given right now. You're far less relational when you're in your head, and your mind is always coming up with strategies to protect your ego. I mean, it's a well-known scientific principle. And also, the mind is a construct of thoughts, and thoughts are inherently really just projections into the future, usually worry, or ruminations on the past. Thoughts aren't ever about actually right now. That's direct experiences right now. But thoughts are always about future and past. And so when you live in your thinking mind, as most of us do, you'll always kind of have this thought world that you think is real, but isn't quite real, which is you're just projecting onto everything and your interpretation of everything. But your interpretation is not always accurate. Often when you're triggered, it's rarely accurate, to be honest. So embodiment is helping you take some of that awareness that is normally on that thinking mind and put it into physical sensation in the body. For two reasons. One is physical sensation only happens in the moment. Otherwise, it just turns into a memory of the physical sensation. So when you have some awareness on your physicality, you actually come more into this present moment. It just has the effect of crowding out a lot of that thought world that you've created and brings you more into the now. So men that have trained their awareness, part of their awareness onto their physicality, just occur as more present, more grounded, more here with what's actually happening rather than sort of overreacting based on their past. So these exercises are training you to bring your awareness into your physical body and then let it rest there even when you're not trying to do it. So it starts to become more of your natural set point. So I don't know. A simple example that I give is let's take meditation as most men do it, and let's kind of put a teensy twist on it that makes it more about the embodiment aspects of it and bringing your awareness. So in meditation, at least as it's taught, I'm not talking about every school of meditation and deep into their theology and not theology, but deep into their philosophies of how they do it. I'm talking about how it actually gets taught to beginners and how beginners try to do it. Those are two very different things. With beginners, most beginners will tell you they've been taught, okay, sit, close your eyes, settle yourself. And then as thoughts arise, notice the thought, and then make a conscious effort to not engage with it, to let it just kind of float on by, and don't give it any energy. Don't latch into it. The problem is that is the mind noticing the mind do something and then try to not think about that thing that it's starting to do. It's a little bit incestuous. It's kind of like, I always call it the fox guarding the hen house. It's actually really hard to do. And that's why a lot of people don't have a practice, because they try it, it's their New Year's resolution, but they don't stick with it, because what happens is they try to have their mind notice the mind and make the mind not think, but they don't. And they're just constantly drifting off into thought. And after 20 minutes of sitting, they spent 18 of those thinking, and they get discouraged and then they quit and they don't do it. Well, what if you started to bring more sensation in? And it's not that some schools of meditation don't use sensation. It's just that as it's taught, most people don't get that transmission. And so they're not using the sensation. So what if instead you sit quietly, you close your eyes like I'm doing, and then what I teach guys to do is don't try to notice thoughts and then try not to think about them. That's like saying don't think about a pink elephant. You're going to start thinking about a pink elephant. So what I say is, okay, if you feel yourself thinking, which you will, that's fine. Take your perineum, squeeze it 1, 2, 3 times, and then send all your awareness, like send about half your awareness down to the sensation that's created when you squeeze it. So let's do it together, Mike. So as
Mhm.
you and I are talking,
This is
of course,
intimate.
we're thinking, so it's 1, 2, 3, but now put your awareness on the sensation that you're creating, both during the squeeze and even after the relax. You can still feel kind of that reverberation. So do it again. Once, feel that squeeze, feel it. Don't think about it. Feel it. 2, and let go, and feel it. 3. There's a lot of sensation created there.
Yeah.
So turn your awareness towards that and just physically feel or feel the physicality of what you're doing, and just feel. Don't think about feeling. Don't think about it, the perineum. Just squeeze it and feel that actual sensation. So now if you go into meditation and you got your eyes closed, okay, and then I start thinking, just go, okay, turn attention. 1, 2, 3. Feel, 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 and then feel, feel, feel turns into think, 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 and then squeeze. 1, feel that. 2, feel that. 3, feel that. Now just feel that the echoes of it, the ghost of the feeling. You can still feel it. That's how you can meditate very successfully, because at least for me, it's about 100 times easier to direct my awareness towards a sensation and feel it, rather than tell me not to do something. So the positive action is always more tangible than the negative action, like don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using physical sensation now to draw your awareness in. And even as I'm talking to you now, I can still feel the sensation in my perineum. So I'm actually doing one of the principles called split attention, that's in the book. Is I'm actually relating to you, but I'm feeling my body at the same time. It's kind of like jogging and listening to music at the same time, and they become a merged experience. You're doing both. That's what we're talking about here. So if I just kind of talk to you and feel the perineum, which I can still again feel, I'm not having this like, oh, is Mike thinking this interview is going okay? Like that voice of
Right.
self-doubt that you get and you're relating. Um, that just gets pushed out a little bit because I've got some awareness on my physical sensation, which just grounds me right into the now. It's
Uh-huh.
like it can work instantly. So I always tell guys, to do that, it's like when you're arguing with your woman, one of the sensations I tell them to feel is their weight on the ground. So that's the
Mhm.
sensation of weight is a really powerful one. And so allow some of your awareness to drop to that when she's kind of giving you the right act. You're going to find yourself get instantly more grounded, more present, and more able to choose whatever it is that you do next. And so those are some of the principles of embodiment, and then just one oversimplified practice.
Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that. And the way you described it makes sense to me now when it comes to like that field of meditation,
Hmm.
of where it's been successful. It's always been going to sensation, not trying to do the thing where they say let go of the thoughts. It's always been through that vein of sensation. And what was really cool about that experience is what I noticed is going into that sensation invoked so much other energy. So then I started to notice heat, and then that invoked like, oh, that's pleasurable. Oh, now I'm feeling joy. And then I know that's from the thinking mind. But what was cool about it is I noticed the sensations were almost so prominent that there was no space for the story, that inner critic of the
Yeah.
storytelling about what the
Yeah.
experience is and how it's going. And, like you had named. And I notice like how I now make sense of it with my mind is like taking away that survival piece and just being in the pleasure of the present moment in
Mhm.
connection is how I noticed that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what embodiment does, is over time, it trains you to just become into this present moment. And it's so blissful. I
Yeah,
think it's kind of what you were
right.
hinting at without the word, but it's so blissful. You get into what I call the visceral state, where
Yeah.
you're having a direct visceral experience of the world without all those left brain interpretations. Oh my God. It was just like our left brain just goes nuts. And so yeah, it's a powerful way to live when you do the training.
Hmm.
Really is. It really is. You start to find freedom. The masculine wants freedom. Guys, this is freedom.
Uh,
And in fact, I'll even go, I mean, I say this in the book, and it, you know, in Zen or Buddhist circles, you talk about enlightenment so much. This is enlightenment. When you become fully embodied, and I don't even know what fully embodied actually means, but
yeah.
when you become a deep practitioner of this, like you become enlightened because the illusion of life starts to fall away and you can just rest in the truth of what is actually happening here. To me, that's enlightenment. I
Mhm.
read that from a great author whose pseudonym is Jed McKenna, and he talks about really getting in touch. What is actually happening here? It's a beautiful mantra to sink into, and I think that's what embodiment does. Is it brings you to that point where you can just you're actually with what is actually happening rather than all your projections of what is happening.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And when you share that too, it makes me think of how I'm just thinking of my own experience here is doing this work, doing the embodiment practices, learning to like challenge that collective conditioned paradigm of the relationship between the masculine, feminine being like maybe how it was perceived growing up, where there was just like lots of like just what I call parallel lives where they're just like under the same roof, but they kind of hate each other is generally
Hmm.
what you sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's common for a lot of people. And what comes up for me as you're sharing this is, whoa, not just the benefit of there being more intimacy and connection and less conflict in the relationship between the man and the woman, but how practicing this and cultivating these relational skills, really, they're relational skills, how much that benefits the mission, which I know so many men are focused on is like my mission, the work piece, the like go and conquer for that other those other layers of freedom that you're talking about, the financial freedom, the like, creating that piece there. And so I'd love, yeah, anything that you feel inspired to share around that, where it's like the masculine relationship being in the core of masculinity as you describe it, why a man like to add a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of men that need more incentive of why would I want to move closer to the feminine? She's like tearing me apart. I want to create more space. Like why would a man want to cultivate these skills, and why how that would actually benefit the mission?
Yeah. I'm gonna I'll make a simple statement, guys. It is not masculine to be fighting with your wife.
Mm.
Not masculine to be fighting with your wife. So if
Oof.
you are not feeding the machine of her needs around relationality,
Yeah.
then you're gonna she's gonna be hard to deal with in most cases. Now we can't generalize over everybody, but in most cases, if you have not learned the skills of being relational, you are almost guaranteed to have a woman that is either super shut down, which is not good, or she's super fired up most of the time and really hard to be around. If you are not relational, if you haven't built those skills, that's what you're going to get. And so, guys, you're in relationship. You got into relationship for a reason because it's cool. It's fun to be with somebody and all the things that come with relationship. But if I don't want to say there's a price to be paid, but there's a responsibility to be born
Mm.
to be relational. If you're in relationship but don't have relationship skills, that's kind of a contradiction. I mean, that's a huge contradiction.
Yeah.
So you don't have to distance yourself. I think this is what a lot of guys do, and what you refer to. You don't have to distance yourself to be with the strong feminine. What you have to do is learn to feed her emotional and connective needs and her relational needs. Once you do that, all that, not all of it, but much of it can really be calmed down because what you're doing is you're settling her nervous system because you're meeting her relational needs. And so it's fun to have a fiery woman in your life. I mean, a lot of guys they fantasize about getting an easier woman. I bet you have at times, Mike. I
Oh,
know
for sure. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
It's like, man, I'm just gonna find myself an easier woman, and then but then if you actually did that, she's probably not nearly as fun as the fiery woman you used to have, and so you get the two sides of the coin kind
Mhm.
of quandary. So it's not about getting away from her either through a new relationship or just taking your own space in life. it's about feeding her relational needs. And so that's, I mean, all my work is about relational needs. And that's kind of what that's the phrase I use for, I think, the style of what I'm trying to bring to the world is relational masculinity.
Mm,
There's a lot of training around masculinity that's out there that is about guys finding their purpose and their sovereignty and being with other brothers, and iron sharpens iron, and all that's super essential. But if you want to be in a relationship, you got to go to the next step and add the relational skills to that. And that's again what I'm trying to focus on in the world is bringing those relational skills. So guys, I guess Mike, I'll just sum those thoughts up by just saying, you don't have to get distance from her to get some peace in this world. You just have to feed her relational needs, and then you're going to discover how awesome it could be. I mean, I could say that I've been in a relationship for 12 years with the woman I'm with, and um, it's been a long journey of learning for both of us, but I'll just talk about me. And so I think, these days I'm pretty skillful at being able to handle the situation. Not all, not always, but most of the time. And the relationship is just so fun. Even
mm,
after all these years, there's still a ton of fire in the relationship because we're generally not having these needless fights that maybe we used to have because we were both less skilled. And it's a really blissful place to be from a relationship standpoint when there's just a lot more being together and going deep and having fun and having experiences rather than the nonsense of these fights that flare up out of nothing, usually
mm.
because that in some way we're not being relational. So those are the thoughts that I have.
Yeah, I'm so glad because you answered what my next question was going to be is why, like, what you benefit as a man by cultivating those skills and, really tending the needs and getting curious about what the feminine's needing. We don't have time to go into it, but where you describe in your third principle of safety, like providing an environment of safety for the feminine to really bring her majesty there, bringing her oracle online, as you talk about,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so true. And when they feel safe, they can just blossom. And
Oh,
if you've chosen a radiant woman, like that's awesome. I mean, that's an awesome experience to have to be with a radiant woman who feels really emotionally safe with you.
oh, yeah. And then how much space she ends up being able to hold for the tenderness of the masculine journey. For me, anyways, like all those tender places, I'm like, oh, the safer the environment for her, the more I get blessed with the glory of like, oh, and now I'm being held in those places that I've been too afraid to have anyone
Yeah.
else hold,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. Which is what she's dying for you to show a little of yourself as a man. Um, that's one of the things that guys do really well. We hide what's inside, "Oh, I'm good, I'm good." And
yeah.
one of the core tenets that I teach in my boot camp offering is how to build emotional connection and safety. And part of that is learning to show your inner state. And so we do a lot of practice around that. Super powerful work that guys really get a lot from.
Yeah, why don't you expand on that just as we're closing here a little bit more on the boot camp and then the resources so men are, who are tuning in there, if you feel that ping or that pull towards GS's work and what he's talking about, and my invitation here is letting yourself feel the resonance of what he's sharing here, like actually feel what he's living here and speaking. If you're drawn to that, maybe share with our listeners here, there's the two books, and then yeah, you had mentioned some online pieces there for men too.
Yeah, and for anybody that hasn't been introduced to my work until now, just go to Amazon and read The Masculine in Relationship. And if you feel called, you can go deeper into the embodiment work in the second book. But go to gsyoungblood.com. You'll see I've got the easiest way is the book. Moving up from that, I've got two video courses, one on the really relative to the first book and one relative to the second book. And those could
Mm.
be good for a guy that likes to self-study and self-pace and really some good work in there. I'm proud of both those courses. Beyond that, I've got the boot camp, and that's the thing I'm most proud of. I think yesterday we just filled our fourth one. They seem to always sell out, which is pretty cool. And this is where I'm taking a cohort of 10 to 12 men through a live 8 to 10 week experience that is based on the book, and we end up doing a lot of practices together relative to the principles in the book. And the guys really, they seem to like the group experience. And I like that a lot. It's fun for me. I see a lot of cross learning taking place. And so, go ahead and check that out. I will be opening up applications for my Leading in the Bedroom workshop, which is just like
Nice.
one of my favorite things to do. We just did a workshop in Mexico in March. It was awesome. And we're going to do this one. This one's going to be focused on leading in the bedroom. And so bringing the energetic, some of a little more of the dark energy and command presence into the bedroom. Of course, always coupling that with heart and care. We always do that. But we try to give guys the skills of bringing the light and the dark and fusing those. And I'm telling you, this is the magic combination of sexuality that most women are wanting from their men. A guy that has the care and the heart, which is the light, but brings the darkness too, because by themselves, neither of those is good for different reasons. So we try to bring both of those. So that'll be in October in San Francisco. So yeah, just check that out on the website. So those are the ways you can find me, or Instagram. You can see lots of my content on there as well.
Beautiful. And that last one you had named, that's in person.
Yeah, the Leading in the Bedroom
Beautiful.
workshop is a live workshop, which is
Cool.
just super fun to do. I bring in female practitioners, and they always just blow the doors off the place with how they're really able to coach these guys up. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, amazing. So any of you listening that are feeling pulled to that, go check it out. I'll put the links down in the show notes. God, GS Youngblood, thank you so much for your time, your energy, the work that you're doing in the world, that I feel so inspired by, empowers me as a man, gives me more tools. And for me, it gives me that deeper sense of brotherhood. And for me, that I feel like that's the reconciliation of what's happened culturally, is returning back to the value, the good, necessary value of brotherhood, and learning from each other's gifts and getting to see like, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, that I struggle with that too, to really dissolve that shame that can be for living in there for a lot of men. Thank you so much. So
Yeah, thanks
grateful
for
for
having
you.
me on. Yep, loved it. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. All of you listening, thank you so much. If you've made it this far, please remember to give this a 5-star rating. Maybe share it with a man in your life. Let this spark conversation, and yeah, be an ally to be able to do this work. All right, if you are still listening to this and you feel like you got a lot of value out of it, my ask is that you show some love, some financial reciprocity. Down in the show notes, if you scroll down, there will be a donation link there. And even if it's just $1, everything helps. And here's why. I do this all for free. And I put out this content. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm going to keep doing it regardless if you donate or not. But what the donation really helps me do is it helps me cover a bit of my costs when it comes to team members, platforms, subscriptions, editing, my time and energy. It just really helps me add more value to your lives. It helps me actually attract better guests, and it's just more resource. And the more resource in the field, which is something I preach all the time, the more resource in the field, the more value there is for everyone involved.